Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new DPP Demystifying Post-Production with me and Dustin Valkema. So this is episode 4 today, where we're going to talk about AOVs and some other stuff, of course. So first, let me show you my screen to see all the amazing stuff we have going on. So this is the Maxon main page events, where we can see we have the demystifying post-production, of course, and also all the other events, the Maxon FMX in Stuttgart, some project breakdown, VFX and chill with Hashi and Set, and so on. So we're always very busy to show you amazing stuff. Well, I hope for you to learn all the Maxon One ecosystem. And if you want to see the past episode, you just need to go to the Maxon Training Team YouTube channel, where we have all our streams. So you have here the videos. Those are, for example, the quick tips from Jonas and the rest of the team with the Redshift quick tip. And if you go to stream, so here it's in French, but here this is the stream. We have all the shows we're doing. Maxon Color, all the DPP, and we can see already in advance what we're going to talk about next month. That will be with me and Dustin again. So you won't get rid of us. And we also have Noseman, who is going to help us and to be the overlord. And the subject will be tracking. And this is going to be a very interesting month. How to track anything, how to know how to track everything, so that you will know everything about tracking. You will see. And this is starting next week with the eyeballing. So how to add, how to track just by the eye to guess the focal length of a shot and so on. Okay, so I will post also, of course, the links for the free t-shirt. I know everybody like free t-shirts, so it's still on, and several other links. And Dustin is now going to talk to us and wrap up this whole month talking about AOV, still with the Raptor render. So go ahead, Dustin.
Awesome. Well, we can wait until the screen gets switched over here in a moment. But yeah, hi everyone. It's going to be another cool session. We should definitely have a bit of time for questions and things like that, because we've already discussed quite a bit of this throughout the month. And so what we'll be doing today is maybe a little bit of freestyling, kind of talking about some AOVs, how I personally use them so that you can best integrate parts of this into your workflow moving forward. So first things first, I wanted to kind of bring attention to the documentation that is currently there for Redshift. There's a whole lot of information about AOVs that breaks everything down. And it's really cool. So if we can get a link posted in the chat so that everybody can go check that out. Nobody is ever above documentation. So if you ever have questions, whether it's today or in future projects, feel free to check this out. They have a lot of information breaking everything down, even far past my caveman knowledge. They go into the science of everything, and it's good stuff. So check that out. We will hopefully have a link posted here. If not, we could probably get that updated later. So today we're talking about 32-bit, and we've also discussed this a little bit in previous weeks as to when and maybe why I use 32-bit versus 16 or 16 versus 32-bit. So obviously 32 has a higher bit depth. You get a lot more I'll say adjustment to exposure and the brightest points and the darkest points, and kind of being able to really balance in between the two, which is amazing. Most of the time you can get away with 16-bit, especially if you take the time to expose things properly in renders or on the 3D side, and not really relying on post-production to make everything look good from that point. Now, there are definitely times where you may need to rebuild a beauty render in post. Now, a lot of times this is going to be something maybe in Nuke, Fusion, maybe After Effects that you're going to have to be doing this for production pipelines. In my case, I actually used to do this all the time. And I realized that it was just a bit more me micromanaging my process and forcing myself to be able to like stay up to date with certain parts of the workflow, as I had been in Nuke for quite a while at that point. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that today. We'll be talking about how to match the look that you get in your render view. So like that ACES transform that happens, how you can match that in Photoshop. And yeah, so we'll get started with that. So first thing that we're going to need to do is kind of rebuild the beauty. So we're going to be using the Raptor multipass EXR that's included in the downloads. And when you open that, again, this is using EXR IO on the PC side. You can use the Pro EXR for Mac. We talked about it, I believe, in week 1. So if you want to know how to get EXRs into Photoshop in the best way possible, check out the first stream. So we have a whole lot here regarding the render and the layers that we have. Some of them are needed, some of them aren't. Some may be black because I set a lot of things up in kind of a preset form when I'm working in Redshift. So we can talk about that a little bit towards the end of the stream and how we would set up these AOVs and get everything rolling and then turn that into a preset so that you don't have to worry about it again. All right. In our file, we've got a lot of render layers. So we have our RGBA that is really a pre-multiplied. We can do a selection here and we'll see that it has its own alpha and transparency to it. We have the AO, which is going to be really good, again, for giving us the ambient shadowing that we have in our scene. And you can also use this in various ways that we'll discuss here in a bit that, allows us to remix and kind of change the way that our render is looking before we bake down all of the beauty and then move to 16-bit mode to finalize things. So what we'll do is we're just going to click through some of these, do a little bit of scene organization. It's probably cool, or I think maybe to see me do it. We've done it kind of every week so far. And that way you can sort of see what the process looks like over and over again, because a lot of these things are muscle memory. And then towards the end of the stream, we're actually going to talk about how to expedite some of these processes using actions. So background, we don't have any background here. Didn't really allow that to get rendered on its own pass. So beauty, this is our standard beauty, not to be confused with the RGBA that has the view transform baked into it. We have the bump normals, crypto matte passes down underneath, and our depth map. So as we're starting to move through some of these, I'm just going to automatically start making alphas in our channels panel so that we have things set up there as we get rolling. So with depth visible, we can select our blue channel, create a new alpha, and call this one Z depth. There we go. And now at this point, because we have quite a few of these layers, I'll deselect, and we have 4, maybe 5 if I include the AO. We have 5 of our more info channel based layers that are going to be set up here. So what I can do is just Control or Command, click and select these layers. And we can scrub down towards the bottom here. We'll see that we have our puzzle mats. And so I can just go ahead and grab these, going to Control G to create a group and call these ACC. All right, so these will be our accessory passes. I can open the group and just turn those off for the time being. We'll drag that up to the top. So I usually like to keep all my info channels, if you will, up at the top of the stack so that I'm not trying to, one, accidentally group them with other layers, or two, I'm not losing where that folder is in the stack of layers as I begin compositing. So we have our diffuse lighting emission, which is going to give us the background render here. We have the fire lighting. Now, I did talk about this in another stream. This was earlier in the month. I forget what week, maybe week 2, where I actually have these 2 passes doubled. That was more my mistake. So we'll see the key light gets doubled twice here. So fire lighting is going to be a bit more of a pass that's going to help us emphasize certain pieces of lighting in our scene. So when I rendered these out, my plan was to rebuild the beauty and then start to enhance certain pieces of this just with the scene specific lighting that we have. So we'll keep the fire lighting, global illumination. We have our key light blank layer. We can delete that. We have our key light layer. Then we have the reflections, which is great. Refractions, rim lighting is going to be the blank one. We'll get rid of that. So just know that as we're doing this, I know it seems like it's pretty crazy to kind of see the process, but these are things that happen quite often as I'm starting to build projects, because I may be, say, using certain light groups in Redshift that I don't need for a completely different project. And so sometimes I'll have those kind of baked into the preset, and then it starts to kick out a bunch of renders that I don't need. Generally, for me, I'll just go and delete them. And as you build actions for certain things, you'll be able to very quickly see exactly what render layers are there that you're not really needing. Like in this case, we would see a lot of those extra passes that are just kind of ungrouped. And we can just delete those very quickly from that point. So rim lighting, we'll do a really good job of enhancing our backlight, subsurface scattering, shadows. This is a little bit different. We discussed this a bit earlier in the month. I like to use the shadow pass not as much as, we'll say, actual shadows. I like to use this as an alpha with an exposure adjustment layer and then maybe a hue saturation on top of that. So it's a little bit different in Photoshop. I don't really go through the process of dividing this by the beauty and so on, like you may do in other software like Nuke or Fusion. So specular lighting is, so these are going to be our reflection specular reflections, and then translucency raw we are not going to need. So how do we rebuild the beauty? Well, what we're going to do here is kind of stack these up, all of these different layers, and we'll see that on this page here, we'll see that we have an After Effects section that we can open up. And this is basically going to give us a kind of visual cue of what's needed to go back in and rebuild the beauty layer. So in this case here, we have the background, and then we're building up with the global illumination, caustic, subsurface, refractions, specular reflections, and then diffuse lighting. Just basically building light on top of itself using the different layers. So we can do that now by taking our diffuse lighting, bringing that down to the bottom. We have the specular here. I think for the global illumination, we can bring that right on top of our diffuse lighting. Now you'll see that in certain cases, say in the After Effects example we just showed, that the layers are a little bit different than how I may do it. When you're starting to add all of this information on top of itself, it's all being added together. So you may see a difference in layers, but I kind of have this set up the way that I'm used to doing it inside of Photoshop. So we have diffuse lighting, we have global illumination, which here we'll need to head to our blend modes and change this to linear dodge or add. Specular lighting, and then what we'll do is grab our subsurface scattering and our refractions. We can bring that down. We'll say underneath the specular, grab our reflections and do the same. Now for the emission, for the background, we can bring that down here as well, maybe up above the subsurface scattering. And our other passes that we have that are really meant to help accentuate the render after the fact are going to be the fire lighting, key light, and then the rim lighting. So what we'll do is select all of these other layers and turn them on. There we go. And we can select them all and head down to add. So this is going to now give us our diffuse lighting, and then everything else is going to be built on top of that. So when we go and we look at the beauty, we can right click this, maybe the eyeball icon, and mark it so that we know exactly what layer this is. We can now turn the beauty layer off and on, and we're not going to see anything changing inside of the render. And that's because what we've done now is we've added all of these different passes up and then added them together, which create the beauty render that we got from Redshift. So we also have the RGBA, which is the version here with more of the baked transform. Looks a little bit crazy, and we could use the alpha to start crunching this out. We're not talking about beauty compositing today because we did that in the previous 2 weeks. And so we're only going to be using this as a bit more of a reference. So inside of our downloads, we have the ASUS CG transform LUTs. And so this is not really, building an entire pipeline process for ASUS inside of Photoshop. What this is really going to be built for is just getting the same look that you had from your render view inside of Photoshop into a grouped format. So what we can do is, I already have an action for this. If I can find it here somewhere in DV. There we go. So we have the ASUS transform. And what this is doing, I can hide, maybe not. There we go. So once I play this action, what this is doing is just loading in the LUTs. And that's really it. It's just loading them in and stacking them. So we have a color lookup, which is an adjustment layer here for the color lookup. It's 1 and then 2. There's 2 of them stacked in the same order that we have here. So the first one, once we build the action, I can kind of show you what that would look like here in a moment. But we can build the action for this, use LUT 1 first and then LUT 2, and then you should be getting the same results. Now, this is actually from the OpenColor.io Photoshop plugin. Spent a bit of time working in that. It was quite confusing because Photoshop doesn't natively support OpenIO or OpenColor.io, and so it gets a little bit confusing when you're doing it. So I exported LUTs that I created in the process, and those will be all set so you can use them. If anybody has issues with those, I believe OpenColor.io, the Photoshop plugin is still free. So if you want to go and download that, you can run through the process. Maybe something's updated a little bit whenever you're viewing this in the future, but that will get you to this point. Now, once we turn the RGBA off and on, maybe we'll zoom into the raptor's face here. We're going to see that now we have already matched at least our render view or what that beauty, ASUS beauty transform outputted. So from this point now, we've successfully rebuilt our render. We've already applied the ASUS look. Now, if you're working on maybe a group project, you have other team members that you're going to need to be sending this off to for whatever reason. Some pipelines are definitely different. You can just turn this ASUS transform off, and that's going to allow them to open it and see things as they're composited here prior to any of those extra curves being thrown on it. So let's turn off our beauty now. We can actually just move this to our accessory layer. And what I'm going to do is use the Smartify Layers plugin. That's a Photoshop plugin from my company, CG Hacks, cghacks.com. They have a freebies page. Go check them out. You can download this plugin for free. Saves a whole lot of time. But what this allows you to do is select layers that you want to have adjusted. And actually, in this case, what we'll do is maybe make all of these visible for a moment. We can select all of the layers that we want to convert to smart objects and just run these selected layers to smart objects. And it's going to go and do them one by one instead of you having to right click every layer. Yeah, shout out to Josh. He's our developer. This guy is great with these type of things. So now we have all of these smart objects. The reason why this is important is because we can start to manipulate everything now in a non-destructive manner, or as close to as possible if we use something like layer masks and so on. So in this case, we can keep shadows off for a moment, and we can look at a rebuilt beauty layer. So what is the primary benefit of 32-bit compositing? It's the extra information moving from most often 16-bit to 32. So you're just doubling things up. You have a whole lot more information. And at this point now, we're able to bring in something like an exposure node, and we can drop this all the way down. And this allows you to hit some really nice kind of manipulations in the way that you want to grade the image and really make adjustments, maybe on a per channel basis. So we're saving a ton of information moving down. We can move up, and we can see that there's still a ton of information here that'll eventually clip out, but we're going quite far. And so we have all of that information now at our disposal. So what this allows is to really start to tweak and manipulate every single individual layer of this. So for instance, we can head to specular lighting, and we can turn that off. Now we have no reflections on our model. We can turn it back on, maybe start to adjust the opacity here. If it was looking too shiny, bring that back up to 100%, and we'll use something like curves to go in and really start to make this look a bit shinier. So as we start to get clipping, this is one thing to look out for, because it does happen quite often, is that we're going to start, if we start to go quite a bit too far here, you'll see that the catch light in the eye here starts to turn black. And you'll know. So there are certain times where I've done this and I've started making big tweaks, and then I realize that, like, hey, I have a, kind of artifacted area once I get to 16-bit. And so at that time, I usually have to make a decision whether I just fix it in post. I know nobody likes to hear that, but there may be times that we may fix it a little bit later on in the process if everything else looks good, and retouch that away. So we'll cancel that adjustment. Now, let's take a look at the other pieces of lighting that we have here. So we have our fire lighting that we can also use our add blend mode on, and we can bring this down. Maybe just put that right above, and we'll layer these as we start to get into it. So our fire lighting is a really nice pass that's just going to amplify the lighting that I would place in here for effects. So this is going to be something that I would create an object, I would say, like in Cinema 4D, Redshift, for example. I did the same thing in Octane. All you have to do is create like a sphere and either make that sphere a mesh light or an emission material on the sphere. And then you'll need whatever method in the render engine that you're using. In Redshift, we just have a Redshift object tag that makes it invisible to the camera. And so at that point, I can start placing spheres and little pockets of light everywhere, and then render that all out on its own pass, which is kind of what we're getting here, which is just those spheres of light manipulated around the scene that are emitting their own fire lighting. So what we'll do is head into this and maybe increase the saturation a little bit. Make it a little bit more orange here. Head the other way. There we go. And now maybe I have a little bit too much light. So where that's going to be coming from, especially on the Raptor, is the subsurface scattering pass. And so what I'll do with that is use a curves here and then drop these midtones down a bit. It's really going to give us some nice definition in some of these shadows. And the reason why we can do that is because we also have the rim lighting pass here and the key lighting pass. And so what I can do is start to have maybe a bit more like individual control over the way that I want each of these specific lights to look. And so when we talk about getting it right, in camera, I make sure that my exposure looks good before I leave Redshift. I know exactly, how I can make this pop. I sort of mentally have a plan once I move to post-production. And in this case, we broke out all of those lights individually, as we were planning to rebuild. So then I can rebuild, and now I have each light. I have the rim light, the key light, and the fire lighting all on their own layer. So I can adjust that and make tweaks as needed. So with the fire lighting, I feel like we're pretty set. I like the way everything looks. I want it to be a little bit more dramatic. So below the fire lighting, we're going to create a curves adjustment layer. And we can just drop this down a little bit further. And maybe I only want this to affect the foreground rather than the background entirely. So what we can do is utilize the Z-depth pass that we created a mask for earlier. So we can select this, and now we'll right click our layer mask and delete layer mask, and then click our layer mask icon down here at the bottom to create a new one, and we'll have to invert it. There we go. So now we're only affecting the foreground with these darkening adjustments, which allow us to now manipulate our rim light and our key light a bit more independently. So we'll turn on our key light, maybe place that on add blend mode here as well. You can reorganize a little bit, and we'll just do the same for the rim lights here, and then we can balance afterwards. There we go. All right, so now we have this individual control over exactly what pieces of this lighting I really want to use. So I feel like it actually looks pretty good at a default state here. I think the key light we can tone down just a little bit and really allow that backlighting to take over. Okay. So at this point now, I'm turning on the kind of ASIS view transform so that I can see exactly how this is going to manipulate things. And I like to actually flip back and forth. So do you always need to use ASIS? It's a question that I get quite often. Effectatron, what's up? I can see you're in here. So I don't always use ASIS when I'm compositing. I love to have the view transform and the information that ASIS offers out of Redshift. So there are times, plenty of times, where I will run untone mapped once I'm rendering out like a 32-bit EXR, and I will do all of the grading and adjustments and things of that nature myself. I really do like the look that ASIS provides. I like the way that it gives kind of a filmic highlight, like it doesn't go way too absurd with it. And then the curve into the shadows is just kind of a really beautiful fall off of gamma. So I like that. But there are definitely times where it makes sense to go and render or composite in an untone mapped form. And that's usually when kind of two sides. If you like grading and color work like I do. So I like to sometimes waste time and sometimes nitpick myself way too far by adjusting with curves and just the general color grading process all day. I could do it, and there are times where I just need to work with a beauty pass. Now, if you're working with a team and you're starting to move these things over to other people, this is where I would start to maybe use this ASIS group that we have here as a base and just turn this off when you save the file. They can open it, view it, if you're not the one doing the grading. Do we have any questions so far?
Yes, we just have one from Effectatron. Do you ever use the LUTs built into Redshift instead of doing color grading in post?
Yes. Trying to think of how to elaborate on that best. It really depends on time. So if I have a project that works for, there are plenty of times, week 2, I think, when we started, maybe week 3, once we started integrating camera raw into this whole process, and hopefully we'll have a little bit of time to look at that before the end of today. There's a lot of times that you can just like do things or maybe even just manipulate. We won't even talk about for the final look, because yes, there are times where I have just applied LUTs and I will send a client over a preview from, just taking like copying the shot out of the frame buffer, sending it over to the client. They're like, this is beautiful, it's approved. What I'm like, wait, what? Like, okay. So yes, there are times where I've done that. I've done it in freelance projects even, and it's just kind of passed. There are other times where I will use that to get a really good idea for grades, because it's so easy in Redshift to just start like cycling through the different LUTs. So I use that as inspiration as well. So kind of both ways, however you want to use it. I have mentioned it before in previous weeks. The older I get, the more out of love I'm falling with really nitpicking myself and be like, I'm being kind of perfectionist, right? So you have to find that balance in your workflow, what works. A lot of times, like Redshift has beautiful LUTs that you can work with. Plenty of other companies sell third-party LUTs. They're great. If they work for you, especially with developing a style, 100% use them. You don't have to go and do this entire process that we're doing here today to just make a beautiful render. So, yeah, two sides of that story.
In the same case, I used to use the LUT a lot before we had ACs. Now I just use them for look dev if I'm to feel the mood. And it happened to me also that the client just loved one particular LUT. But in that case, it's pretty easy because you can still recreate everything in post-production and use that same LUT. It works everywhere. It works in Photoshop, in After Effects, and so on.
Definitely. Yeah, and there it's interesting how like you can develop entire styles just by using LUTs. So I wouldn't say, and I won't even just say LUTs. Between the LUTs and like say Camera Raw or Lightroom presets, if you're using Capture One, it's a little bit different of a process, for rendering, to get to that point. But if you're using something that has presets like Camera Raw, you can develop entire like client libraries of looks that they've already liked and approved. So you don't have to move forward. Like they might just love that look, and you kick out a raw render, slap that Camera Raw preset on it, and ship it, and they'll be happy. So definitely experiment and develop workflows that are going to make the most sense for you. All right. So we've got our ASIS transform in. It's looking super saturated. There's a few reasons for that. And part of that's because of saturation that we placed on the fire lighting. I feel like we may want to adjust this a little bit. Didn't really do that on purpose, but it's kind of a good thing to show why we're using smart objects, right? Is that we have a smart filter here that we can double click. That will allow us to adjust and make these changes. Amazing for studio workflows and any type of project where somebody else is going to be a part of that pipeline. Always try to work as non-destructively as possible. And for the love of all things creative, organize your files, not always as you're doing them, because there are times where it gets a little bit wild, but definitely before you send them off, organize files. That's a good thing, and it will keep a lot of people less frustrated with you. So at this point now, we have quite a bit going on. I feel like the background needs to be lightened a little bit, maybe have some bits of atmospheric perspective. So we'll take a look at our Z depth pass. We can select that, Control or Command, clicking on our thumbnail here, and up at the top, we'll create a new group and just call this effects. Now inside of this group with our selection active, we'll go to solid color, and we can bring this up just a ways here, maybe add a little bit more blue into this. There we go. And now we have some atmospheric perspective. So what we can do at this point, again, we talked about this in a previous week, is dropping the opacity to something like 90, just so it's not 100% opaque and you have a little bit more information there towards the back, to show pieces of the sky and maybe just like a noise or light break up at that point. So we have one here. I think maybe we can create a gradient. We did this last week and it looked pretty sweet. And we'll make our gradient a bit lighter here. Maybe select the same color we have there, make it a bit lighter, for a nice bit of fog to fall off. Click OK. And now, there we go. Click OK again. And now we can control or command holding down Alt. So Control Alt or Command Option, and we can drag our layer mask up and replace the second one here. So as we're starting to build through this process, we talked about this. We had a question about it as to like whether I'm going to use we'll say a group with one layer mask to control certain things, or if I'm going to just duplicate this over and over and over. In this case here, this is definitely where I would create a group. And so what we'll do is create a group, select the two, Control or Command G, and we'll just call this fog. Now, all we have to do is just click and drag this layer mask up to the group. And we can now delete the other layer mask. There we go. So now we have our fog. And what we can do is grab our gradient, maybe make it a bit smaller. Not mean to click OK on that so fast. Make it a bit smaller, and this is going to allow us to start to adjust where that fog is going to fall off. And what we're also going to have here is the direct result of this layer mask impacting the fog. So in our case, what we can do is use levels with our layer mask selected, and we can start to bring this up. And this is going to kind of make the fog a little bit more dense as it falls off just by brightening up these white points inside of that layer mask. So we can click OK. And now this is going to allow us to see that gradient a little bit better that we have falling off of the bottom there. And if we wanted to adjust those independently outside of the group, that's where we would use two different sets of layer masks. One to control how far back that fog goes in space, and then one to control the actual kind of vertical fog that's falling, or yeah, it's falling off as it moves up. So that's how we would do this and make these adjustments. Let's make it a little bit darker with the color fill in the background. And that's going to get a little bit wild. I'm not sure exactly why that one happened. Just undoing here a minute to see where that's going to fall off at. Yeah, that's pretty interesting. So I definitely may not want to go down as far as I think we would. So this is also, as you start to manipulate and you start to make a lot of changes, we can see some of those adjustments as we turn the ASIS off and on. We can get a sense for like how this would look tone mapped versus untone mapped. And we can definitely make adjustments to this. So the way that I like to grade on top of these, maybe if we get time, I'm not exactly sure where in the stack between the two of these that gets a little bit crazy and clipped out in that top right corner. I'm just going to sort of ignore that at the moment, and maybe we'll come back to that if we have time. So if I'm not working untone mapped, or if I am working untone mapped without the ASIS transform visible, the way that I most often like to make adjustments is by using curves. And the reason for that is, if you're using something like levels, you don't really have like finite control over, each part of this curve in the system. So what this allows us to do is start off by initially figuring out where we want the darkest black point to be. And so we can see in the areas here by the raptor's thigh, and even on the right or the left-hand side here of the image, you're starting to get a little bit too much crunching in some of these shadows. And so the way that I'm going to do this is maybe starting to work around with various parts of these curves. So very popular is the good old S curve. You can just bring it in, create a slight S, gamma pop, and then you'll be all set with kind of a nice like filament curve, of contrast over it. another way that you can do this is using the ACES transform. I know it's not really called an ACES transform, and Dr. Sassy, I know, is probably going to want to smack me after this stream. But it's not official. It's just giving you the same look in Photoshop. So just know that. Just know that. There's a lot more to it, and I know that he's the scientist.
I was thinking exactly the same thing. But you use it as a color tone map, and to replicate the effect.
Yeah, it definitely replicates it. It's not actual ACES in Photoshop. So just we'll clarify that. So I feel like I'm going to have a chunkler coming at me from the side, and Dr. Sassy is going to be over there. So yeah. And so underneath the transform here, we'll just call it the transform from now on. What I do like to do at times is start to adjust the black points and bring those up and get to a point where I have just enough fall off to where it's not moving towards 100% black and a loss of detail. Because as we start to move on forward with parts of this process, really in general, as I move to color grading, you want to sort of flatten things out a little bit, right? You don't want this to be very contrasty because you're not going to have much room to actually grade on top of that. And so without, say full compositing and doing everything here, we're going to bake this down from 32-bit to 16-bit. And then we'll use camera raw from that point on. So the way that I do this is save at the 32-bit state. Always save it a 32-bit state. You can delete that after the project is approved and everything else is good. Go ahead and delete it. It's going to be a much larger file, but you will thank yourself if you save it at 32-bit and your client wants to come back and say something, that needs to be adjusted. Like maybe in this case, they don't like the orange light. It's going to be a lot easier to remove that and tone that down inside of your comp file. Yeah, you just don't want it. Just save it. All things, save it. Now, in order to make the adjustment, right, from 32 to 16, we're going to head to image mode, and then we'll see these 16 bits per channel here. So things that you need to know when you're making these adjustments, right? When you go to 16, you're going to have a lot more tools available for you to use, the selection tools, the wands, various other adjustment layers and things, just effects in general that you can't do at 32-bit mode. That's why I like to get my base comp done, get everything looking good, have a nice kind of filmic look to it. And then I convert down to the 16-bit after saving. And then I go into camera raw and maybe composite some of the actual effects there. So this is going to open up quite a bit for us. So we'll click on 16-bit. And we're going to have the option to merge it, cancel, or don't merge. So merging this is going to save its appearance exactly where it's at. If we click on don't merge, I'll just give this a moment. This is what's going to happen. And so what it's trying to do is take all of that information from the 32 bits per channel that we had and just crunch it down without saving the black point and the white point information and baking it down. So it's a little bit different in this case. So what we need to do is Control Z. There we go. What we need to do is head back to mode, go to 16 bits per channel, and we're going to click on merge. So earlier on in the month, we had talked about why it's important to build the alpha channel library. And this is why, because once we do this, we're not going to have any of the other layers that are in this composite file. So what I'm going to do is cancel here a moment, and I'm going to show you one of the ways that I get around that. And this is by making these guys visible. I can actually just go in and delete the beauty render out of here for the moment. We'll make them all visible, and I'm just going to copy my accessory group. See the little spinning wheel. Once that's done being copied, now I'll head up to mode or image mode, 16 bits per channel, merge this down. We'll get to this point. So the HDR toning, sometimes it can look pretty cool, but it's not going to be a direct representation of what you have here in the file. So you'll want to change your method from local adaptation to exposure and gamma. And then we'll see that this is going to be updated to look as it did before. I'm not sure where the I have that square in here before. Am I losing my mind? No, it's not there. All right, so not my fault. We'll just merge it down and see what happens here. Exposure gamma. Maybe make adjustments.
Yeah, this is very weird.
Yeah, it's kind of weird that it.
Uh,
I'm not sure where that came from exactly.
Because it's just a rectangle.
Yeah, it's just a rectangle. Anyways, we can move on without that. So at this point, now we are matching what we had in 32-bit. It is 16-bit. I don't think I had a selection saved. I don't think I had a selection saved.
No, it would appear on the channel, I think.
Yeah, maybe it's an odd place to have the rectangle. Anyways, so once we get to this point, we are in 16-bit. So what we don't have is all of our channels. Remember, we copied the group from before. We can just paste that in, and now we have our passes here. So we can make some adjustments to things. Like we have our normals, our crypto mats, even the depth, even though that's already saved, and then our puzzle mats. So at this point, we can now make adjustments to the image. So for our layer 1, we'll just call this comp. We'll leave that there. Convert to smart object. And now from this point, what we can do is head in and grade this using camera raw. So I'm pressing Control Shift A or Command Shift A to open camera raw with that layer selected. So this is going to bring up the camera raw interface and disregard. That's actually really weird. It's kind of throwing me off that there's a square there or a rectangle.
Maybe you could just paint it before
yeah,
quick and dirty way.
Let's do it. We'll do it dirty.
All right. It looks like a bug, but maybe, I don't know.
Ooh, let's see what happens if
what puzzled me, it's just a square. It's I mean a rectangle.
If we can just add this. No. Okay. We'll paint it. Definitely don't suggest going this route, but it's quite solid information. So fixed it.
All done.
Okay.
We haven't seen anything.
Off the project. Don't say anything. Don't name the layer. Just send it off, and you will make your day interesting. So we're going to merge this down. There we go. Maybe not quite that. There we go. So we'll merge this down. We can right click, convert all of this to a smart object, and Control Shift A, bring up camera raw. And so I do already have some presets. Quite a few of them are from cosplay projects and things like that I'm doing compositing on. And so what we can do is head to our preset panel, and we can just start to see what some of these different presets look like. Maybe find one that works. I actually like, would probably need to reset. So I think this is building on top of, it's building up on top of itself. So we'll select this one. We can head back to our adjustments. I do want to go down to effects, and we're just going to tone down the grain here because I don't need it to be so much. Click OK. There we go. So now we have this graded. At this point, it's still non-destructive. And this is going to give us a nice kind of second half of the workflow. So 32-bit is building everything up, getting your comp looking the way that you want. Then you move into 16-bit. This is where I'm actually doing some of the overlay progression with it and so on. So what we'll do is maybe throw a couple fire overlays, head into fire effects, and we can go to grungy here. I will just select one and throw it into the comp. So we did have questions about Oniric. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit here today so that you'll know exactly how I handle some of the, we'll just say, effects when it comes to the bloom and glare and all of the glowing stuff, etc. So in this case, we're going to create an alpha specifically for the fire. So what I'll do is I can control click the layer here and then hold down shift and control, and I'm going to click the other layer that's going to select those. So both of these effects, this is from the fire effects from CG Hacks. I can post the link to our website if you'd like to check them out. They all come with a pre-rendered alpha transparency. So we're using 3D tools to build all of these different Photoshop overlays so that we can use them and work with them as similar as possible, as far as depth and things like that we get from actually loading a VDB into 3D. So there's kind of two ways to think about it. I like to do this stuff in post for stills. If I'm in motion, I'll definitely have something like a VDB, in my scene file that's already pre-animated and it just does its thing. So on the post side, I like to work with this with 3D rendered, very similar workflows to what we're used to so that we actually get that depth and transparency, especially when you're looking at smog and smoke, things of that nature. All of that alpha channel depth really plays a huge key part in a lot of the work that I do, at least. So once we get here, we have our alpha for the fire. So we're going to add some glow to the fire and to the rest of our scene without the fire. So what we're going to do is open up the Oniric panel. There we go. Pretty cool splash screen pops up. All right. So we have options. This is Oniric from Composite Nation. Super cool company. Awesome team behind this. But what this is going to do is absolutely, hopefully, I would say, change your workflow when it comes to adding bloom and glare. Now, hopefully, we do well on the stream here because I do have issues with this sometimes when I'm actually sharing my screen and so on. But in the main interface here, we have a new and edit. So it's fairly simple. Create a new light effect, bloom, glare, streak, so on. Or you can edit one that's already in your scene. And then we have the luminosity and transparency, which are going to allow you to create channels based off of these things. So in this case, we're just going to select new because I already created the alpha 2, which is a channel that's based on the fire mask. Let this do its thing and open up. And already, as soon as Oniric loads, we'll see that we have quite a bit of bloom going on in the scene. Sometimes this can be a little bit overbearing just because of the preset state of it. This does allow you to save your own presets so that you can work a little bit faster. In this case, we'll do like a very rough kind of quick breakdown. So what we can do is change the transition from soft to hard. It just depends on how you want your highlights to be read in your scene file. I think soft is going to work for us. The threshold is pretty much the threshold and how much of your scene's luminosity like you actually want to pick up and glow on. So what we can do is down at the bottom, click on X-ray. This is going to show us a heat map of exactly what parts are really getting picked up. So if we increase our threshold here, there we go. We'll see that we're now getting a whole lot more of our image being picked up. And if we click on X-ray, we're going to see that the glow is completely taken everything over. So when I open an image for the first time, what I'll generally do is head to X-ray, and then I'll start to adjust my threshold so that I'm hitting certain areas that I know I want to affect the most. So in this case, we really want to impact kind of two areas of our scene, right? We have the fire that maybe I want impacted differently from the sky. Okay, so what we're going to do at this point is turn X-ray off, and then we can head into mask and activate mask. And what this is going to do is load in a channel. So if I head to alpha 2, we'll see that we have our entire fire wrapped into a single channel. So with that done, we can accept. And now we're only impacting those areas with the fire. So if we look at our X-ray, we can see the heat map specifically for the fire, which actually had brighter areas than the rest of the scene. So it's going to be nice for us to maybe expand the threshold a little bit. There we go. And now we can see that we have some really nice fall offs. So the biggest thing that I love about Oniric 100% is the fall off from the core of the effect to the color transition outside of it. It just handles it very well, and yeah, it's very realistic if you use it subtly. I'm not a very subtle artist, so I like to go pretty crazy with it. Oftentimes, I'll add color to this by using the little color wheel icon here. And this is going to allow you to use a bit more of like a solid color. So in this case, I'm using red pumped into that. It really gives it a nice, rich, kind of fiery orange glow as those colors fall off. And we'll just say save. So this is going to be just our fire. And hopefully that works out for us. We'll see if the stream gods like me today. So do we have any questions here as we're getting
I was wondering if Oniric exists for After Effects or other software. It's just Photoshop?
Just Photoshop. Currently, hopefully someday they'll expand.
Because yeah, it's
a little bit further.
I like the output. It's very interesting.
Yeah, and it's nice. So currently, this is black with the lighting effect. So this would be like your normal kind of photo overlay, black background, set it to screen mode. Oniric does allow you to do this kind of unmultiplied. So it's just like complete transparent background. So what we'll do is kind of turn this back on. Didn't mean to actually go that far. So take a look at before and after. You can see the effects that Oniric already had here. And so what I'm going to do at this point is name this group. We'll call this Fire Glow. So we have our Fire Glow here, and we're going to want to create another version of this that's only going to affect the glows in the background. And the best way to do that is actually by using the depth map that we already have in our scene. And so the first thing that I'm going to do is activate our mask down at the bottom. We're going to load channel, see depth, click load. And now, I'm not sure why Photoshop keeps closing the panel. Actually, I do. I changed the adjustments for that. That's fine. But we're going to activate this adjustment here for the alpha channel. Now we can zoom out just a little bit and move over so that we can open up Oniric here and start to work with the threshold first. So we'll click on X-ray, maybe bring this down. If you want light to come from one direction or the other, we can already edit this mask, first of all. So I don't think we want to do it in this case, but you can edit the mask with a brush, maybe a gradient, and kind of paint that out of certain areas. What I like to do is use like a sunspot on CG Hacks. We have the lens effects that have a ton of different overlays for suns and so on, different lighting effects that you can place in the corners and really start to really let your light pop from one side of your image. I'm a big fan of light direction, so you can emphasize that on one side or the other. In this case here, where we had a rim light on the top right of our Raptor, all of the information that we're seeing is down towards the center and moving up. It's totally fine in this case showing this off, but you will definitely want to take light direction into consideration, maybe putting something like a brighter gradient up here if you don't have sun photo overlays and things of that nature. So thresholds down a little ways. We can use some of these buttons on the bottom. So the first one here is going to be transparency. This is going to give you a completely transparent background for your glow output. We have the solo mode, so you can see what that looks like. We'll see that it's all transparent already. And then we have the final preview versus more of a low res. So we can preview the final output here. And then we have our before and after. So the little eye drop or the little eye icon here is going to be your before and after. So right now we have quite a big radius on the glow. I'm going to turn our radius down to kind of push that in just a little bit around the raptor so it's not so hazy towards the background. Take a look at our threshold. We can increase the dynamic range. It's not something that I personally do too often, but you can increase the dynamic range here at the bottom to start getting a little bit more out of maybe shadowed areas and so on. And we can see how that starts to push. So we'll leave that back down for now. There we go. And I'm going to tone it down. And then what we'll do is actually adjust the color of this a bit. Turn off X-ray, preview the before and after. And so that's looking pretty good here for us. And again, we can just add a bit of a different color to this. So we can see some of those adjustments, kind of the way of rapidly making adjustments in the 32-bit side. Definitely make sure that things aren't clipping too far. You're going to get some weird artifacts like we have in the top right, but just make sure to keep an eye on your compositing throughout the process, and that shouldn't be too big of a deal. All right, so here we're just going to add a little bit of a color to contrast the front. I did like some of the bluer hues that we had previously, and so we can add that in, drop our saturation a little bit, and really just be able to get some of the nicer effects of, the light wrap that Oniric offers. Click OK. And just wait. Do we have any questions?
No question. I'm curious about it's a bit slow because I guess it must do a lot of operation. It must be actions. I don't know. I think it converts to do the, for example, the heat map. Maybe it's some kind of LUT.
So yeah, it's still working with it's working through Photoshop's processes. So like if it's it's a smart object. So as you start to layer things up on a smart object, it's always going to have that processing time.
Yeah, it's going to go back and forth.
I do know that they are working on getting a UXP version ready for release, which is going to be completely I'm excited because it is going to make it a little bit faster. Almost what I feel would be instant compared to some of these. So yeah, I do know that they're working on that. And they've got quite a bit of cool stuff coming, but that's Oniric. So I know that there are questions about it, and the glows that you can create. This is 100% what I would consider to be like my chef's kiss to most of my images, especially in the compositing side, is, being able to throw these together. So then begs the question, do I add Oniric's effects before or after my entire compositing and grading process is finished? It all depends on what I'm planning to do with Oniric. Sometimes I'll just use just a slight, maybe 10% amount of Oniric to give like more of a cinematic kind of haze to it, similar to like a diffusion filter and so on. In this case, this was like, hey, I really like the grade that we have here. Let's make the fire pop. Let's add a little bit of emphasis, behind our subject. And this is the result that we have. So 2 different ways to approach it. It really all depends on the image and where I sit, at this point. So workflows are obviously huge. I have different workflows for my composite photography, my cosplay stuff, than I do like client driven 3D projects. So I use whatever's necessary. All right. Do we have any questions before we end the day? I feel like I've been talking for the past hour.
No, no question I can see in the comments. Yeah, I'm very pleased with the Oniric. I mean, the result is really really nice. So that's something I just find out.
Yeah, I've been using it now for four years, maybe 5 years. Like I was part of their beta crew before it was actually what it is today. And it's just amazing. So it's been a part of my workflow since, and it's come a long way. So I'm excited to see where UXP takes them because it's a whole different ball game. I'm still tripping about the UFO square. I don't know what happened.
Yeah,
It might have
I
just
was
been
wondering about it.
Might have just been a weird glitch, but we fixed it in post, so I'm happy.
As always.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's about it for today. If you guys have any questions, definitely let me know. Just leave a comment, down in the video once it's actually posted, and maybe tag my regular YouTube channel. And once I get a notification, I'll pop over and hopefully answer. So yeah.
Well, it was really really nice. Thank you, Dustin. And yeah, I feel like I want to do some stills in Photoshop. I just love it. Yeah, the UFO, the square is a good example. It's so easy to just paint something. This ability to paint whatever you want is amazing because this is something which is difficult on all the other software, including Nuke and so on.
Right.
The fact to be able to I was wondering, I know there is a bridge, actually you can use, there's a way to use Camera Raw with After Effects, something I think I will inquire. Maybe it doesn't work anymore, I don't know. I know it was possible at some point. Maybe
I'm not sure. I'd have to look into that.
It was possible at least, so it could be interesting to see that.
Yeah, I'd be curious. Maybe we'll have to do a follow-up next month. If we have time in one of those weeks, we'll just say, hey, it's here or it's not. Because Camera Raw is great. If that's available in other Adobe, products. Like it's such a big part of my pipeline. As is Lightroom when it comes to photo editing. So it just makes sense to implement, that type of stuff into my 3D renders. And then once you do that and you realize that you have presets and all of that you can just start to look through, it's kind of like LUTs, but they're actually adjustable.
Yeah.
It's game changing, especially for client work, because you can whip out a whole lot of renders that all have consistency in a matter of minutes on the post side, versus individually it could take hours.
Cool. Okay, so I think that's a wrap up. So thank you very much, Dustin. Thank you, everyone, for staying with us during this month. So yes, we are we're thinking about a series about ACs because there was, again, some question on it with Dr. Sassi, who's doing all the time code for us. And as Dustin said, slap our hand when we do, we say approximation on is very thorough and technical, and he will be with us, I hope, to explain really what ACs is. All right, and we will see, you will see Dustin and me again next week, because we're going to start the whole month with tracking. So next week will be Dustin and Noseman talking about eyeballing, how to do tracking without tracking. Will be very interesting. You can get away a lot just by guessing the focal length of a shot and so on, approximating the light. And then after that, we will see proper tracking, how to replace logo and so on. So it will be exciting months.
Yeah, it'll be good. I'm excited.
All right, so that's it. Thank you all, and see you later.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.